The grand hall echoed with the resounding clang of bells, each chime striking Hazel Harris's heart like a hammer. The sound didn't evoke the joy of the romantic wedding she'd once dreamed of, but rang like a death knell for her youth and freedom. The mansion hosting the ceremony was breathtakingly opulent, overwhelming anyone who entered. Its high ceilings were adorned with gold crystal chandeliers, hung like eternal constellations, and a red carpet stretched from the entrance to the altar. The guests sat in neat rows, mostly influential figures from finance, politics, and media. They weren't there for love, but to witness a deal of the century veiled as a wedding. Hazel stood in the preparation room, her slender frame encased in the pristine white fabric of a custom-made Paris gown. Every lace detail and pearl was meticulously crafted, yet to her, the dress felt like chains binding her to her fate. Sunlight streamed through the large window, illuminating her smooth, tawny skin, highlighting the regal and resilient beauty her mother once praised. But in the mirror, Hazel's eyes reflected only gloom and unmasked pain. "My daughter, today is a momentous day. You must be strong for the family." Her father, Charles Harris, spoke from behind her. Once her pride and joy, the man stood rigid in a black tuxedo, his face taut, his eyes a mix of pride and anxiety. Hazel turned, staring directly at him. "You call this momentous? I'm being forced to marry a man nearly 30 years older, notorious for his ruthlessness and scandals to save your company's debts." Charles faltered, his hand trembling as he adjusted his tie. "You don't understand, Hazel. If this wedding doesn't happen, Harris Group will collapse. Thousands of employees will lose their jobs. Everything your mother left behind will vanish. Do you want to see that I want to live like a human, not a commodity traded for a contract?" Hazel cried, but no tears fell. She was too exhausted to weep. Charles turned away, avoiding her gaze. "You'll understand when you're older. Marriage isn't just about love. It's about duty, sacrifice." Hazel wanted to scream, to smash everything, but her feet felt shackled. From childhood, she'd learned to be obedient, the perfect daughter, to earn her father's love. Now that obedience had become the yoke strangling her life. The wedding music swelled from the hall, signaling that the moment had arrived. A staff member knocked, bowing. "Miss Hazel, it's time." Hazel took a deep breath, smiled, and linked arms with her father. Cameras erupted as the door opened, and hundreds of eyes turned to her. Guests murmured in awe at the radiant young bride, but none saw the trembling hidden in her grip on the white bouquet. The path to the altar felt endless. Each step crushed Hazel's heart. She held her head high, striving for composure, but inside 1,000 shards screamed. At the end of the aisle stood Maxwell, the groom. In his 50s, with sleek silver hair and an expensive tuxedo hugging his tall frame. He smiled an arrogant smirk of victory. Hazel looked at him, her heart tightening. She recalled the exposés about Maxwell's ruthless takeovers. Small companies crushed rivals, vanishing without a trace. She shuddered at the thought of a future imprisoned by him. The pastor's voice rang out solemn yet distant. "Today we gather to witness the sacred union." His words drifted past Hazel like a breeze. All she heard was her own frantic heartbeat. "No, I can't live like this." The thought roared, drowning out her fear. Suddenly, her gaze caught a man standing by a side aisle, one of the security guards in a black suit. Tall, broad-shouldered, his face calm yet striking. His deep, sharp eyes drew her, as if they saw through the despair in her soul. The world fell silent. Hazel stood at a crossroads: submit to a captive marriage or seize a fleeting chance. When the pastor intoned the fateful question, "Hazel Harris, do you take Maxwell Richards as your husband, to love and cherish for all your days?" All eyes were fixed on her. The air was taut as a bowstring. Her father stared, commanding with his gaze. Maxwell smirked, extending his hand. Hazel gripped her bouquet, her breath quickening. In a flash, she turned, striding away from Maxwell toward the guard. The crowd gasped. Maxwell's face darkened. Her father paled. Hazel stopped before the man. Before he could react, she leaned in, pressing her lips to his. A bold, desperate, unexpected kiss. The room exploded. Cameras flashed wildly, and murmurs rose like a storm. Hazel closed her eyes, her heart pounding. She didn't know what she'd just done. She only knew that without it, her life was over. The man froze, then touched her back, pulling her close. What began as a staged kiss sparked an electric current through her body. Hazel reeled. For a fleeting moment, she felt saved. Amid the chaos, a thought flickered. This man was no ordinary guard. The clamor in the grand hall erupted into a whirlwind of chaos. Guests whispered and gasped, cameras from the media flashed like fireworks. Some stood in shock, witnessing an unprecedented scene in the annals of high society weddings, the bride abandoning her groom at the altar to kiss a stranger. Maxwell's face flushed crimson, his eyes blazing with fury, as he stormed down the steps bellowing, "Seize them! Both of them!" Instantly, black-suited security guards fanned out surrounding the aisles. The wedding's solemn air morphed into an unspoken battlefield, where power and honor were openly challenged. Hazel barely had time to process when the man gripped her hand lightly. His voice, low and resolute, sounded in her ear. "Follow me now." Without waiting for her response, he pulled her toward a side hallway leading backstage. Hazel's high heels clacked on the marble floor, mingling with the shouts behind them. Her long wedding dress dragged, slowing her steps, but the man's determined grip forced her to keep pace. They veered into a narrow corridor dimly lit by wall sconces. The pounding of footsteps grew closer behind. Hazel panted, her heart racing. Everything was happening too fast. Just minutes ago, she stood at the altar. Now she was fleeing like a fugitive. "Who are you?" she gasped, but he only shook his head firmly. "Not now. Trust me." He led her along the tight passage, then shoved open a small door to a stairwell. They raced downstairs, the air damp and heavy with the dusty scent of the building's service area. "The emergency exit at the end of the hall will get us out. Hurry." Hazel clutched her dress, struggling to run, Maxwell's shouts echoing in her ears. "Don't let her escape. I'll crush anyone who defies me." The words sent a shiver through her. Fear mixed with adrenaline fueling her steps. As they neared the exit, a group of guards appeared, blocking their path. Flashlights blinded them, voices barking, "Stop!" The man. George didn't hesitate. He tightened his grip on Hazel's wrist, pulling her against the wall. He pressed a small button on a discreet earpiece in a split second. A soft explosion sounded from the opposite hallway, smoke billowing out. The guards scattered, giving them a precious opening. "Go!" he hissed. They plunged through the smoke, burst through the emergency door, and spilled into the night. Cold wind whipped Hazel's face, carrying the scent of gasoline from the parking lot behind the mansion. The city's lights twinkled, but to her, they were merely a backdrop to a frantic escape. George swiftly guided her to a black car, tucked in a shadowed corner. He opened the passenger door, motioning her in. Hazel hesitated momentarily, her mind flashing with doubt. Should I trust this man? But the sound of approaching footsteps and flashing lights left her no choice. She slid into the seat, her heart still pounding. George jumped into the driver's seat and started the engine. It roared to life, tires screeching as he peeled out of the lot. Behind them, several black SUVs. Maxwell's men gave chase. "We'll never get away!" Hazel cried, eyes glued to the rearview mirror. George gripped the wheel, his voice calm but resolute. "Don't worry. They won't catch us." The car sped through empty streets, street lights streaking across the windshield. The pursuing vehicle's sirens blared, but George maneuvered with expert precision, darting into narrow alleys and using every turn to shake their tail. Hazel held her breath, clutching her dress. She never imagined she'd be racing through the night like a fugitive yet. In the chaos, she felt a strange sense of freedom for the first time in years. After nearly 20 minutes of heart-pounding pursuit, George's car lost the pursuers, slipping through a dark alley and stopping in an abandoned lot. He killed the engine, and silence enveloped them, broken only by Hazel's ragged breaths. Who are you?" she asked, her voice trembling. George turned to her, his gaze sharp but not menacing. He pulled a small metal card from his pocket, its engraved name glinting faintly, George Taylor. "Let's say, I'm not who you think." Hazel froze. The name was familiar, tied to one of the world's largest tech conglomerates, often gracing the covers of business magazines. Yet moments ago, he'd posed as an anonymous guard. Why? Why was someone like you there? Why save me? George didn't answer immediately. He leaned back, staring through the windshield into the dark void. Maxwell doesn't just want to marry you. He wants to devour your family's wealth and influence. I have my own reasons for stopping him. Hazel clenched her fists, her unease lingering. She muttered, "But how can I trust you? You could just be using me." George's piercing gaze locked onto hers. "Trust me or not, that's your choice. But you'd be Maxwell's puppet by now if I hadn't acted." The car fell silent. Hazel turned to the window, watching distant lights flicker. Her thoughts churned her father's betrayal, Maxwell's nightmare, and this man beside her savior, or another trap. George broke the silence. "It's not safe yet. We need to move. I have a temporary safe house. There you'll understand more." Hazel hesitated, then nodded faintly. At that moment, she had no way back. The car started again, rolling out of the desolate lot and melting into the night. Maxwell was surely raging somewhere out there, mobilizing every resource to hunt them down. But Hazel somehow knew that reckless kiss had opened a new path, one fraught with danger, but brimming with hope. A question echoed unanswered in her heart. Was the man beside her, her destined savior, or the fiercest challenge of her life? The car sped through the silent night, weaving through unfamiliar streets. Hazel tried to track the route, but the rapid pace and constant turns soon disoriented her. The familiar city faded, giving way to dimly lit roads, then abruptly flared back to life as they entered the bustling commercial district. After nearly an hour, George steered into the basement of a sleek high-rise. An iron gate opened with a code and swiftly closed behind them. No alarms sounded, no signs of pursuit. Everything ran smoothly, as if meticulously planned. Hazel stepped out of the car silently, her heart heavy with suspicion. She asked softly, "Where are we?" George's reply was curt, "Somewhere safe." He led the way to a private elevator. As the doors closed, he swiped a card and entered an extended code. Hazel stood beside him, still clutching her dust-stained wedding dress, feeling both adrift and uneasy. The elevator stopped at the top floor. The doors opened to a sprawling apartment that stretched across the penthouse, minimalist yet luxurious. The space gleamed with polished wood floors under soft golden light, and floor-to-ceiling glass walls offered a panoramic view of the city. Far below, skyscraper lights twinkled like a vast, starry sky. Hazel stood still, torn between awe at the opulence and fear that this place might be a prison or a temporary refuge. George walked in, tossing his long coat over a chair and casually pouring himself a glass of water. He glanced at Hazel, his gaze unhurried. "You can sit. No one will find you here." Hazel approached the white sofa slowly, her cumbersome wedding dress making sitting hard. She set her wilted bouquet aside, her eyes fixed on the enigmatic man. "You planned all this, didn't you?" she asked, her tone half accusatory, half certain. George's lips twitched faintly. "I don't leave anything to chance. To take down Maxwell, every move has to be precise." Hazel shivered. Maxwell's name thickened the air. Steadying herself, she pressed, "You said you want to take down Maxwell. What am I in your plan? A pawn bait? Or just a random victim?" George set his glass down and stepped closer, stopping just a few feet away. He leaned slightly, his piercing eyes cutting through her defenses. "You're not a pawn. You're the only one who can make Maxwell slip. I just seize the opportunity you created." Hazel lifted her chin, a mix of surprise and anger in her gaze. Seize the opportunity. That kiss. To me, it was a desperate gamble. To you, it was just part of a calculation. A heavy silence fell. George neither denied nor confirmed her words. He walked to the glass window, staring silently at the traffic below. Hazel sat, her chest heaving. She wasn't sure if she was angry at him or herself for trusting too quickly. After a moment, George turned back, his voice softer. "I may have phrased it poorly, but I promise. I won't let Maxwell harm you." Hazel let out a bitter laugh. "Do you know how many people have made that promise? And in the end, it was always for their own gain." George fell silent. Hazel caught a flicker of weariness in his eyes, as if he too carried his own burdens. The tension eased. Hazel stood wandering the apartment. She passed neatly arranged bookshelves, abstract paintings on the walls, and a piano by the glass. The space suggested its owner wasn't just a fighter, but someone who sought peace amid chaos. She paused at the piano, her fingers brushing the keys. A clear note rang out, soothing her troubled mind. George glanced over, his expression softening. "You play?" Hazel nodded faintly. "My mother taught me, but I haven't touched one in years." An unexpected warmth broke through the strain. Hazel sat, her fingers gliding hesitantly over the keys, weaving a gentle, faltering melody. The cold apartment seemed to warm. George listened, a rare smile tugging at his lips. At that moment, Hazel sensed that this man might not be as cold and calculating as she'd thought. When the melody faded, Hazel closed the lid and turned. Their eyes met in a wordless exchange brimming with unasked questions. But the fragile moment was shattered when George's phone buzzed. He answered, his voice low. "I'm listening." Hazel couldn't hear the other end, but his face tightened. Hanging up, he strode to a safe, unlocked it, and pulled out a thick file. "We're running out of time. Maxwell ordered a citywide search. I need your cooperation to expose him." Hazel stepped back. "I can't. I don't know anything about that world of power. I want to be free." George placed the file on the table, his gaze piercing. "Freedom isn't given. You have to take it. And your only chance is now." Hazel fell silent. In George's eyes, she saw fierce determination and a hidden pain, a combination that stirred her heart. The apartment was quiet, save for the pounding of Hazel's pulse. She knew her fate had veered onto an irreversible path from this moment. The first morning in the high-rise apartment passed in an eerie silence. Hazel sat by the vast glass window, her eyes tracing the silver-gray sky, where birds glided quietly among the skyscrapers. She hadn't slept all night. Images of Maxwell's enraged shouts, her father's furious gaze, and the impulsive kiss with the stranger replayed relentlessly in her mind. Behind her, George set a silver tray on the table bearing hot coffee and toast. His voice was steady, neither overly warm nor as cold as before. "You should eat something. We have a lot to do today." Hazel glanced at the tray and shook her head. "I'm not hungry." George sat across from her, his sharp gaze studying her as if reading her every thought. Without another word, He nudged the coffee cup toward her. The gentle aroma wafted up, coaxing her to lift it to her lips reluctantly. After a moment, Hazel set the cup down and met his eyes directly. "You saved me. I'm grateful for that. But I can't just sit here while the city's in uproar. You owe me a clear explanation." "Who are you really?" George paused briefly, stood, and walked to a bookshelf against the wall. He pulled out a black leather folder and placed it before Hazel. "There are things I didn't plan to reveal so soon, but you need to understand why you're at the center of this." Hazel cautiously opened the folder. Photos, financial reports, and brief contracts spilled out. Maxwell Richards's name appeared repeatedly. There were candid shots, Maxwell shaking hands with politicians, exiting an underground bank, conversing with unfamiliar faces. "He's manipulating multiple corporations, building a covert power network," George said, flipping to the final page. "But most crucially, he uses marriage as a tool. You're just a piece in his plan to solidify control." Hazel shivered. Before her was a copy of a stock transfer agreement, stating that after the wedding, a significant portion of Harris Group's shares would fall into Maxwell's hands. "My father, did he know about this?" Hazel's voice trembled. George met her gaze, his expression unreadable. He knew, but he likely believed it was the only way to save the company. Hazel's face burned. She was just a bargaining chip all those years in her family's embrace. A bitter pang rose, choking her. "Why show me this? What can I change?" George sat down, his voice calm but firm. "You can be living proof. Maxwell can't hide his true nature if the person at the center exposes him." Hazel let out a bitter laugh. "Is it that easy? He holds the world in his hands. I'm just a runaway bride. No one will believe me." George leaned forward, his eyes blazing. "They will when I stand beside you. I'm not just a bodyguard." Hazel narrowed her eyes, her lips quivering. "Then who are you?" George looked at her as if weighing whether to speak or hold back. Finally, he said slowly, "George Taylor, chairman of Taylor Global." Hazel froze. The name was no stranger. She'd read countless articles praising the young tycoon with vast wealth and influence spanning tech and finance. He was often called the chess player in the shadows for his cunning moves that toppled rivals. She stared at him, her voice a whisper. "Why? Why is someone like you tangled in my story?" George clenched his fists. "Because Maxwell doesn't just threaten your family. He's my enemy. If he succeeds, everything I've built will be devoured." The air grew heavy. Hazel felt the room spin. She wanted to scream, to run, but her legs wouldn't move. "So," she said, struggling to speak from the start, "you approached me not to save me, but to serve your own fight." George held her gaze unwavering. "At first, yes, but now, it's not that simple anymore." Hazel reeled at his ambiguous words. A storm of emotions erupted within her: anger, disappointment, and a faint, unnameable spark whenever their eyes met. She turned away, hiding her glistening eyes. "I hate being anyone's puppet, even yours." George didn't respond, only sighed and stepped to the window. The faint sunlight illuminated his face, revealing a weariness she hadn't noticed before. Hazel sat in silence, torn. She despised the deceit, yet understood he was her only shield against Maxwell. That truth hurt so much, she didn't know whether to feel relieved or weep. Outside, the city hummed with life. But within the apartment, a secret had just been unveiled, changing everything. Hazel was no longer just a fugitive, but a player in a deadly chess game between two titans. Night draped the city in a dense veil of lights and distant car horns. Hazel sat at the kitchen table in the high-rise apartment, stirring a steaming cup of tea. George emerged from his study, his tie discarded, a few shirt buttons undone, revealing traces of exhaustion after a tense day. Hazel glanced at him briefly before turning away, her lips pressed tight. The truth he'd revealed still burned in her mind, making trust elusive. Yet this same man had pulled her from the jaws of a forced marriage. The contradiction left her teetering between two cliffs. George opened the fridge, grabbed a water bottle, then asked abruptly, "Can you cook?" Hazel blinked. "Why? We've been eating on the go all day. We can't keep relying on canned food if we're lying low for a while. The kitchen's stocked." Hazel eyed the tidy kitchen, its gleaming knives neatly arranged. A memory flickered her mother teaching her traditional recipes during holidays, a ritual abandoned after her mother's death. "Maybe," she said hesitantly, "but I'm not sure you'd survive my cooking." George's lips twitched. "Give it a shot. I trust you more than I trust myself." Whether out of curiosity or a need to prove herself, Hazel stood rolling up her sleeves and rummaging through ingredients. She picked vegetables, some meat, and rice. George watched his gaze curious, as if this were an unfamiliar challenge. "Don't just stand there." Hazel shot him a sideways glance. "You've got hands, help." George let out a rare chuckle and complied slightly clumsily, washing vegetables and chopping onions as instructed. Hazel found the sight both irritating and amusing. A billionaire who made the world tremble fumbling with a kitchen knife. "You're chopping onions like you want me to cry harder," she teased without thinking. George raised an eyebrow. "If I make you cry, I'll take responsibility." The simple words made Hazel pause. His tone was light, but his eyes held a sincerity that quickened her pulse. She turned away, pretending to focus on the rice. An hour later, a simple dinner graced the table: steamed rice, stir-fried vegetables, and braised meat. Not gourmet, but the aroma filled the apartment, warming them both. Hazel sat across from George, watching as he took his first bite. He chewed slowly, then nodded. "Really good. Better than fancy restaurant food." Hazel smiled faintly. "You're exaggerating. I just wanted something warm and decent. Sometimes the simplest things are the most valuable," George said, his voice low and warm. The meal passed quietly, but comfortably. Instead of discussing power or plots, they spoke of ordinary things: morning tea habits, favorite books, childhood memories. Hazel shared how a bike crash left her terrified for years. George recounted his first business failure, losing millions overnight. These small stories chipped away at the invisible wall between them. After dinner, Hazel washed dishes. George approached, taking a plate from her hands. "Let me." Hazel raised an eyebrow. "You do dishes?" He nodded slightly. "What, I can only give orders." They stood side by side at the sink, their hands brushing briefly as they reached for the same dish. Hazel pulled back, but the fleeting touch left an indescribable echo. Late that night, Hazel sat by the glass window, the city sprawling below like a sea of stars. George approached, gently draping a shawl over her shoulders. "It's cold," he said. Hazel clutched the shawl, warmth seeping into her heart. But the memory of his hidden truths dimmed her smile. "George," she said softly, "I don't know how much I can trust you. You could be saving me or using me. I'm scared I'll wake up one day and find I'm just a tool." George was silent for a long moment, his eyes holding something profound and guarded. Then he replied quietly, "I don't expect you to trust me immediately, but give me time to prove myself." Hazel turned away, offering no response. Yet within her a small flame flickered, impossible to extinguish. Outside, the city never slept. Inside the apartment, two strangers were drawn closer by fate. Sparks near tinder, waiting for the moment to ignite into a blaze. The afternoon sky hung heavy with gray clouds, foreshadowing an approaching storm. From the high-rise apartment's glass window, Hazel gazed down at the city. Her heart weighed down, Days of fleeing had exhausted her, but the deepest pain wasn't her fear of Maxwell. It was the image of her father, who had silently pushed her into a dangerous man's grasp. George stood behind her, having just ended a brief call. His voice was calm, but sharp. "My people reported in. Your father broke away from Maxwell a few hours ago. If you want to see him, this is your chance." Hazel spun around. "Are you serious?" George nodded slightly. "I'll arrange it. But we must be cautious. We don't know how much influence Maxwell still has over him." Hazel fell silent. A flood of suppressed emotions surged, resentment, pity, and a yearning for answers. She clenched her fists and nodded. "I need to see him. Whatever he says, I have to hear it myself." The meeting place was an abandoned warehouse on the city's outskirts, once a logistics hub for Harris Group, before it shuttered. No media lenses would find them here. No glittering lights or red carpets, only the howling wind, whistling through rusted iron frames. George led Hazel inside, eyes scanning every shadow, as if danger lurked in every corner. His swift, precise movements reassured her, yet underscored the tension. In the center of the warehouse stood a familiar figure, slightly stooped, salt and pepper hair, a worn suit, no longer pristine her father. "Hazel." Charles Harris's voice was hoarse, a mix of relief and shame. Hazel froze her throat, tight eyes stinging. 1,000 words dissolved into silence. George tilted his head toward her. "Go ahead. I'm right here." Hazel took slow steps forward. A few meters away, she stopped, staring directly at him. "Do you have anything to say to me?" "Father." Charles lowered his face, his hands trembling. I'm sorry. I had no choice." Hazel let out a bitter laugh. "No choice. Did you think I had a choice? You threw me to Maxwell like a commodity. Do you even know what kind of man he is?" The aging man looked up, his sunken eyes weary. "I know. But Harris Group was on the brink of collapse. Maxwell promised to clear the debts and save thousands of jobs. I was desperate." Hazel shook her head, tears falling unbidden. "You chose to save the company by sacrificing your own daughter. What does family mean to you?" The warehouse fell silent, save for the wind rattling the tin roof. Charles tried to step closer, but Hazel retreated a step, the distance between them, an impassable chasm. "I know I was wrong," he choked out. "But you have to understand, I've lost so much. Your mother's gone and the company is all I have left. If it fell, I'd have nothing to hold on to." Hazel clenched her fists, anger mingling with pity. She'd once idolized her father, believing him an unshakable force. Now he stood small, consumed by fear and ambition. "Have you ever thought about me? I needed a family. Love, not a cold-blooded contract." Her voice broke. Charles fell silent, then suddenly dropped to his knees before his daughter. "I beg your forgiveness, Hazel. I didn't know another way. Maxwell promised so much, and I was too weak to refuse." The sight stunned Hazel. She'd never seen her father kneel to anyone, yet here he was bowing to his own daughter. George stepped forward, resting a hand on Hazel's shoulder, as if lending her strength. Hazel let him finish. Hazel took a deep breath, steadying her voice. "Father, tell me, what else is Maxwell hiding?" Charles hesitated, his eyes filled with fear. "He doesn't just want the company. He's after control of an underground financial network, manipulating global markets. Marrying you was a facade to mask his takeover. If he succeeds, he'll be untouchable." Hazel's blood ran cold. Her father now confirmed George's earlier words. Once confined to family and the company, her world was merely a piece in a global power game. "You trapped yourself," George said sharply. But there's still time to fix it. Hazel is the key to turning this around. Charles looked at his daughter, trembling. I don't deserve to ask, but we can save Harris Group if you work with him. I only hope you won't hate me forever. Hazel stood silent for a long moment. Tears fell, but her face grew resolute. She wiped her cheeks and met his gaze. I do hate you, but I won't let Maxwell win. If you genuinely want to make amends, stand with me. This is your last chance. Charles bowed his head, an older man's tears falling. I'll do everything. George stood beside her, his gaze sharp but softening as he looked at Hazel. He knew this moment had transformed her from a coerced woman into a true warrior. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the metal sheets. 3 figures stood in the warehouse's dimness, each bearing wounds, mistakes, and newfound resolve. Hazel lifted her chin. For the first time, she no longer felt like a victim. Maxwell wasn't just the man who stole her freedom. He was a target she'd face with all her strength. And she knew her journey had only just begun. Night descended on the city neon lights, casting a tense glow across the hazy sky. The atmosphere in George's heavily secured apartment was so charged that the wall clock ticking seemed audible. Hazel sat at a long table surrounded by stacks of thick files retrieved from the old warehouse. Beside her, George and Charles leaned in, their expressions grave. Charles said, "This is all the evidence I've managed to keep," sliding a folder toward Hazel. But it's not enough. Maxwell is meticulous, always cloaked in a veneer of legality. George opened his laptop, its screen illuminating a complex web of financial transactions. I've been tracking his money trails for months. He's using shell companies in Asia and the Middle East. If we strike those key links, his entire system will collapse. Hazel stared at the screen, her heart racing. She was used to dry financial reports, but now each number felt like a blade exposing Maxwell's hidden, chilling truth. "What's the first step?" Hazel asked, her voice firm. George met her gaze. "We need a surprise attack. A direct assault would let him erase his tracks, but international agencies will jump in if we release a bombshell immediately." Charles interjected, his voice heavy. "Maxwell has insiders in many organizations. However, some Harris Group board members remain loyal. If we unite, we can call an emergency meeting and reveal the truth before he can take control." Hazel took a deep breath. "Father, our family will be dragged into a media storm if we do this. Are you ready for that?" The aging man paused, then nodded faintly. "What honor is left to preserve? When I sacrificed my daughter, I'd rather face the storm than bow to him again." George placed another folder on the table, his tone resolute. "I have a security team and legal experts. But Hazel, you need to go public. You're the only one who can shift the narrative. A runaway bride turned whistleblower, the media won't ignore that." Hazel trembled briefly, but then steeled her gaze. "If that's what it takes, I'll do it. I'm done being seen as a victim." The plan took shape. George used software to map out 3 main fronts: media, legal, and financial. Front 1. Media. Hazel would appear at a secret press conference, releasing initial evidence to shock the public. Front 2. Legal. George's legal team would file documents with international investigators, simultaneously requesting asset freezes. Front 3. Financial. Charles would rally loyal shareholders to transfer shares, temporarily blocking Maxwell's majority control. "We only get one shot," George said firmly. "If we fail, he'll retaliate with everything he's got." Hazel sat up straight, her hand resting on the folder. "Then we can't fail." For hours they hashed out details. Hazel asked probing questions, scrutinizing every point. George explained patiently, while Charles added insights from old connections. The tension gave way to a budding trust. For the first time, the 3 sat together, like a true family, united by a shared goal. Past midnight, Hazel stepped onto the balcony. The city sprawled below, its lights dazzling, yet distant. A cold breeze made her shiver. George followed, draping a thin jacket over her shoulders. "You're tired." Hazel shook her head. "No. I'm just realizing. I've never felt this powerful. Before, I was constantly controlled, forced. Now I'm choosing my path." George looked at her, his eyes a mix of admiration and warmth. "Hazel, you're not just fighting for your family. You're fighting for thousands manipulated by Maxwell. Don't forget that." She turned, a faint smile breaking through. "Thank you for believing in me." In that moment, the distance between them shrank. But instead of letting emotions take over, Hazel took a deep breath and returned to the table. "We have work to do." The next morning, George moved Hazel and Charles to a safer location, a small suburban villa with state-of-the-art security. There, George's trusted team awaited legal experts, financial advisors, and old allies from intelligence. All eyes turned to Hazel as she entered. George introduced her briefly. "This woman will take on Maxwell. From now on, we protect her at all costs." Hazel was surprised by the respect they showed her. She was no longer just a runaway bride, but the heart of the campaign. Charles sat with loyal shareholders negotiating. The sounds of discussion typing and a humming printer blended into a tense symphony of their silent war. George stood beside Hazel, showing her how to scan investigative reports. When facing the media, be concise and firm. Don't let them drag you into emotions, stick to the evidence. Hazel nodded, taking careful notes. A newfound determination gleamed in her eyes. On the second night, as the team rested, Hazel sat alone with the thick files. Photos, spreadsheets, forged contracts, all laid bare Maxwell's true face. Her heart tightened, but fear no longer gripped her. Instead, a fire of outrage burned. George entered carrying 2 coffees. He set one before Hazel and sat down. "You remind me of my mother." Hazel looked up. What was she like? George gave a faint smile. A woman who never bowed. She believed truth would always prevail. "Seeing you, I feel that belief again." Their eyes met, deep and sincere. Hazel whispered, "Then let's prove it together." George nodded firmly. "We will." As dawn broke, the plan was complete. They had mere days before Maxwell announced a new project to mask his schemes. Hazel knew stepping into the spotlight would change her life forever. She turned to her father and George, her voice resolute. "We've been forced enough. It's time to fight back." The heavy atmosphere shattered, replaced by a surging resolve. A fractured family, a near-collapsed company, and a mysterious billionaire had allied in the suburban villa. The battle against Maxwell had officially begun. The press conference was held in a luxurious downtown hotel, meticulously arranged by George and his trusted team. Only reputable journalists and influential international media were invited, with the entrance secured by 3 layers of security checks. Hazel stood in the waiting room, her heart pounding. Gone was the lavish wedding dress, or the ornate attire typical of high society events. She wore a simple tailored suit that accentuated her resolute demeanor. Her makeup was minimal, her hair neatly tied back, and her eyes gleamed with determination in the mirror. George entered holding a tablet with a summary of classified documents. He looked at Hazel and gave a slight nod. "It's time. Are you ready?" Hazel took a deep breath. "If I'm not, there's no turning back now." George placed a hand on her shoulder, his gaze bolstering her. "Remember, don't let fear take over. Just speak the truth." The door opened, and the clamor of dozens of reporters flooded in. Camera flashes erupted as Hazel stepped to the podium. She felt hundreds of eyes piercing her momentarily, but she stood tall, inhaled deeply, and began. "Hello? I'm Hazel Harris." Her voice echoed through the room. "I'm here today to not explain why I fled my wedding, but to reveal the truth." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Cameras zoomed in, microphones extended. Unfazed Hazel opened the tablet, projecting prepared documents onto the large screen behind her. Maxwell Richards. A familiar name in finance, isn't just an investor. He's the mastermind behind a network manipulating markets, using marriages and forged contracts to seize power. Images appeared, stock transfer agreements, candid photos of secret meetings, and irregular financial records. Hazel spoke firmly, each word a dagger slicing through the veil of deceit. "My wedding was a facade. Had it proceeded, my family and thousands of Harris Group employees would have become pawns. I refused to stand by and let the truth be buried." The room erupted in chatter. Reporters leaped up, firing questions. "Do you have proof? Is this a corporate rivalry scheme? Aren't you putting yourself in danger?" Hazel calmly raised the original documents. "Everything has been verified. I'm ready to submit it to investigators." The conference room exploded. The news went live, spreading like wildfire. Social media buzzed with hashtags about Hazel Maxwell and the runaway bride. George sat in the back row watching. Pride flickered in his eyes, but he never stopped scanning the doors, alert for any threat. As predicted, Maxwell's response came swiftly. As Hazel left the conference, her phone buzzed with calls from unknown numbers. A chilling message flashed on the screen. "You just signed your death warrant. No one will save you again." Hazel froze, her hands ice cold. George noticed her expression, grabbed the phone, and his eyes flashed with icy resolve. "Don't be afraid. This is just his first counterattack." Charles approached, his voice tense. "We need to leave now. Maxwell won't let this slide." George nodded, leading them through a back exit to a waiting car. They sped away as a frenzied crowd of reporters swarmed the hotel's front. Back at the suburban villa, the team gathered around a large screen. International news channels aired updates non-stop. Major outlets reported the story. Financial regulators launched investigations, and some shareholders publicly withdrew support from Maxwell, causing his conglomerate's stock to plummet that day. Hazel watched in silence, torn between fear and relief. She hadn't expected her words to ignite such a powerful ripple effect. George sat beside her, speaking softly. "You just triggered an earthquake. He'll be more reckless than ever. From now on, I must be cautious at every step." Hazel nodded, her gaze unwavering. "I chose this path. No matter how hard, I'll see it through." That night, the villa buzzed with activity. Lawyers made endless calls. Shareholders sent confirmation emails, and international media lined up for interviews. Amid the chaos, George and Hazel found a quiet corner. "You did incredible today," George said, his voice warm. Hazel gave a faint smile. "I just told the truth. But honestly, I'm still scared." George looked into her eyes. "Fear is normal. Courage is facing it head on. Hazel, you've proven you're stronger than anyone thought." A silent moment enveloped them. Hazel felt her breath slow, yet her heart raced. In George's gaze, she saw not just resolve, but a quiet, warm faith. Then a security alarm blared, shattering the calm. A guard rushed in, pale-faced. Intruders at the outer perimeter. Likely Maxwell's men. The villa erupted into chaos. George sprang up, his eyes cold and sharp. "Get Hazel and Charles to the safe room now." Hazel stood frozen, her heart pounding. She knew the public battle had just begun, and Maxwell wouldn't stop until one side was utterly destroyed. The security alarm wailed relentlessly, echoing through the villa. Red lights flashed frantically, casting urgent streaks across the walls. Hazel clenched her fists, her heart pounding wildly in her chest. George took command instantly. Get them to the safe room. Two trusted guards flanked Hazel and Charles swiftly, guiding them toward a hidden staircase behind a wooden panel. But Hazel hesitated, glancing back at George. His eyes were sharp, his entire presence radiating readiness for battle. "What about you?" she asked urgently. George turned his response curt. "I'm staying here." Hazel wanted to protest, but a loud explosion at the gate shook the villa. Windows shattered, shards clattering everywhere. Black smoke billowed, mingled with the shouts of guards. Charles grabbed his daughter's hand, his voice trembling. "Come on. Hazel, hurry." Hazel was pulled along her legs, unsteady. The narrow hallway to the safe room was dark, reeking of dampness and gunpowder. But as they reached the first step, a shadowy figure lunged from a corner. "No one escapes." A masked man swung a steel baton at Hazel. She screamed, stumbling aside. A guard blocked the blow, metal clanging with sparks flying. A fierce struggle erupted before her eyes. Hazel scrambled to her feet, trembling as she backed away. In that moment, she felt the fragility of life. One swing, one bullet, could end it all. George appeared just in time, his gun flashing. The masked man collapsed with a cry. George rushed to Hazel, gripping her shoulders and pulling her up. "Go!" He barked, his eyes cold, yet laced with worry. The group reached the safe room. The steel door slammed shut, muffling the chaos above. But gunfire still echoed relentless as war drums. Hazel clutched her chest, struggling to breathe. Charles slumped to the floor, drenched in sweat. In the dim light, panic etched every face. George stood at the security console, eyes glued to the monitors. Cameras showed Maxwell's men storming and advancing deeper into the villa. "We've been betrayed," George growled. "Someone in security leaked our location." Hazel stepped forward, her voice shaky but resolute. "What now?" "We can't wait to die here." George met her gaze, unwavering. "I'll lead them out through the auxiliary tunnel. But you and your father must prepare. Nowhere is completely safe once we leave." Hazel nodded, clutching her shirt. "I'm ready." The auxiliary door opened, a cold gust rushing in. The tunnel stretched dark and endless, lit only by flickering emergency lights. Their footsteps echoed, each one pounding against Hazel's fear. Suddenly, another explosion shook the ceiling above. Dust rained down. Hazel gasped. "Are they trying to collapse this place?" George replied tersely. "No. They want to force us out. But they won't expect our alternate route." The group moved faster. Hazel gripped her father's hand, feeling its icy chill. In his aged eyes, she saw both fear and deep regret. At the tunnel's end, a heavy metal door loomed. George entered a code and turned the lock. The door swung open, revealing a narrow courtyard behind a forest. Fresh air carried the scent of wet grass and faint gunpowder. But as they stepped out, flashlights blazed from multiple directions. A familiar voice rang out, dripping mockery. "I told you, Hazel, no one can save you." Maxwell emerged from the shadows, backed by dozens of heavily armed men. His calm face twisted with a sinister smile that made Hazel shudder. George stepped in front of her, raising his gun. "If you want her, you'll have to go through me." Maxwell laughed coldly. "I have no problem with that." The air grew suffocatingly tense. For a few seconds, the forest fell silent. Then the first shots rang out. Gunfire erupted, sparks flashing in the night. George returned fire, pulling Hazel behind a tree. His guards formed a defensive line, while one escorted Charles, who stumbled but held steady. Hazel clung to George as bullets struck the ground around them. "We can't fight this many." George gritted his teeth, eyes fixed on the battlefield. "Trust me, I have a plan." He pressed a small device on his wrist. Seconds later, the roar of an engine echoed from afar. A helicopter appeared, its spotlight sweeping the forest. The whir of its blades drowned out the gunfire. George's men lowered ropes from above. Quick climb. George wrapped an arm around Hazel, pulling her from cover. Bullets flew, but the blinding light and engine roar disarmed Maxwell's men. Hazel was hoisted up first, her heart racing as she was lifted. Below, George fired a few final shots before grabbing a rope and climbing after her. Maxwell looked up, his eyes bloodshot with rage. "Hazel, you'll pay for this," he roared. On the helicopter, Hazel huddled trembling. The wind whipped through the rotor's whine, deafening. George sat beside her, his face still tense, but his hand resting reassuringly on her shoulder. "We're safe now," he said softly. Hazel turned to him, eyes brimming with tears. "No, Maxwell won't stop. He'll hunt us to the end." George nodded slowly, his voice warm but firm. "True. But we won't stop either. From now on, we're not just defending, we're attacking." Hazel gazed out the window, the city shrinking beneath the night's glow. Fear lingered, but beside it burned a fierce resolve. The nighttime assault wasn't just Maxwell's warning, but a declaration of war. And Hazel knew the path she'd chosen left no room for weakness. After the nighttime assault, no one in the group entertained thoughts of hiding for long. Maxwell had proven he could find them anywhere, even in the most fortified locations. Hazel sat in the helicopter, returning to a secondary base, her heart surging. For the first time, she didn't just want to escape. She tried to end it all. George stood beside her, his eyes fixed on the glowing city below. He said nothing, but his steely gaze told Hazel he was ready for a new move, with no room for retreat. The secondary base was an abandoned office building, repurposed as a temporary command center. As Hazel and George entered, experts presented the latest data. A large screen displayed a flood of headlines. Maxwell Holdings, stocks plummet, international probes target, hidden assets. Hazel Harris, key witness. George crossed his arms, his voice resolute. "We won't wait for Maxwell's next move. It's time to strike first." Hazel sat down, her eyes on the screen. "What's the plan?" He pulled a hard drive from his bag. "This contains Maxwell's financial records for the past decade. I had insiders planted long ago. Release this, and he'll have no defense." The room buzzed with murmurs. Hazel paused, stunned. Why hold on to it until now? George met her gaze. "Without a witness, it's just cold numbers. But with you, the woman forced into his marriage scheme, confirming it, it becomes undeniable proof." Hazel clenched her fists. She understood this was the decisive blow. But it also meant she'd become Maxwell's direct target with no escape. "All right," she nodded. "Let's do it." The next day, the plan unfolded. Instead of a traditional press conference, they opted for a global live stream through an independent media platform, bypassing channels Maxwell might control. In a small recording room, lights shone on Hazel. She sat before the camera with George and the tech team behind her. The countdown began. 3, 2, 1. Go. Hazel looked directly into the lens, her voice firm. "I'm Hazel Harris. Today I bring you the truth Maxwell Richards has hidden for years." She opened the files, presenting specific figures, shell companies, and forged contracts. Images flashed on the screen, each piece of evidence sharp as an arrow. "This isn't just my family's story. It's a crime affecting millions, destabilizing global markets. I can't stay silent any longer." The technicians' keyboards clattered as global viewers' messages poured in. "We support you, Hazel. Maxwell must face justice." George stood behind, eyes glued to the screen. He knew if this succeeded, Maxwell would lose everything. As expected, Maxwell's response was lightning fast. Minutes after the broadcast, he appeared on TV, sneering, calling Hazel a liar, and George a business rival, staging a plot. But the tide of evidence was unstoppable. The proof spread everywhere, and international agencies announced investigations. Hazel sat silently, sweat dampening her palms. She hadn't imagined her voice could wield such power. George placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice steady. You just dealt him a blow he can't recover from. But he'll be more desperate now. That night, security at the base doubled. Hazel sat in the room, her emotions churning. Though danger loomed, she felt a profound relief. For the first time she wasn't controlled. She was shaping her fate. Charles entered his figure weary, but his eyes alight with hope. Hazel, I'm proud of you. I've made so many mistakes, but you've done what I never dared in a lifetime. Hazel's throat tightened, but she stayed composed. Father, we haven't won yet. This is just the beginning. At dawn, news flooded in. International police froze Maxwell's hidden accounts. Several of his close allies were arrested trying to flee. Markets reeled, and Maxwell vanished from the media. In the base, George and Hazel tracked every update. He turned to her, his voice soft but firm. This decisive strike has brought him to his knees. But don't forget, a cornered beast is more dangerous than ever. Hazel gazed out the window where dawn was breaking. Fear lingered, but beside it burned an iron resolve. Then we prepare for the final battle, she said. George nodded, a faint smile on his lips. And this time, we'll end it.